A disabled veteran carried groceries for an elderly woman, unaware she held the key to his dream job. The weight of the paper bags felt familiar in Marcus Johnson's arms. Something solid to hold on to when everything else in his life seemed to be slipping through his fingers. He shifted his weight to his good leg, the prosthetic beneath his right pant leg clicking softly as he adjusted his stance on the cracked sidewalk. "Are you sure I can't call you a cab, ma'am?" Marcus asked, the afternoon sun catching in his close-cropped hair, remnants of a military cut he couldn't bring himself to grow out even 3 years after his discharge. The elderly woman smiled up at him, her eyes crinkling at the corners like weathered parchment. "2 blocks isn't worth the trouble, young man. Besides," she patted his arm with a veined hand, "I enjoy the company." Marcus nodded, swallowing past the tightness in his throat. Company. It had been weeks since anyone had sought his out. His apartment walls had started to feel like they were closing in on him, each rejection email pushing them another inch closer. "I'm Eleanor, by the way," she said, her pace unhurried but determined as they moved down the sidewalk together. "Eleanor Whitman." "Marcus Johnson, ma'am." The name felt hollow in his mouth, a shell of who he used to be. Before Afghanistan, before the IED, before he became another statistic, another disabled vet struggling to find his place in a world that had moved on without him. The spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwoods, but Marcus barely noticed. His mind was too full of the morning's disappointment. Another job interview where eyes had drifted to his prosthetic leg, where smiles had grown tight and professional as they'd assured him they'd be in touch. They never were. "You've got the look of a man carrying more than just groceries," Eleanor remarked, her voice gentle but direct as they paused at a crosswalk. "Military?" Marcus stiffened, his jaw tightening. "That obvious, huh? My late husband was Army. 40 years married to a soldier teaches you to recognize the signs." The light changed and they stepped off the curb together. "Vietnam took pieces of him nobody could see. I imagine your war took pieces too, some visible, some not." Something in her matter-of-fact tone loosened a knot in Marcus's chest. No pity, no awkward gratitude for his service, just acknowledgement. "Afghanistan," he said simply. "3 tours. Came home for good 3 years ago." Eleanor nodded as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. "And now you're trying to figure out where you fit." A car horn blared nearby and Marcus flinched, his heart rate spiking before he could control it. The grocery bags crinkled in his suddenly tight grip. Eleanor pretended not to notice, giving him the moment he needed to breathe through it, to push back against the memories that still ambushed him without warning. "Something like that," he finally managed, his voice rougher than before. They turned onto a tree-lined street of modest but well-maintained homes, each with small front gardens bursting with spring color. Eleanor slowed in front of a blue 2-story with white trim and a wide front porch where a ginger cat dozed in a wicker chair. "This is me," she said, fishing keys from her purse. "Would you mind bringing those inside? These old bones appreciate the help more than I can say." Marcus hesitated. The thought of small talk in a stranger's home made his palms sweat, but the genuine warmth in Eleanor's eyes made refusal impossible. "Yes, ma'am." The interior of Eleanor's home felt like stepping into another era. Not dated, but timeless. Books lined built-in shelves and framed photographs crowded every surface. The air smelled of lemon polish and something baking. Marcus followed her to a sunlit kitchen, where he carefully set the grocery bags on a worn wooden table. "Tea?" Eleanor asked, already filling a kettle. "Or coffee if you prefer. I've got cookies in the oven, snickerdoodles. My granddaughter's favorite." "I should probably," Marcus began, but Eleanor waved away his protest. "Humor an old woman. It's not often I get to thank someone properly." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. Your leg must be bothering you." The acknowledgement of his disability, stated so plainly without awkwardness, caught Marcus off guard. Most people pretended not to notice, their eyes darting away from his prosthetic as if it might burn them. "It's the weather changing," he admitted, lowering himself into the chair. "Gets temperamental when rain's coming." Eleanor nodded knowingly as she moved about her kitchen with practiced efficiency. "Arthur says the same thing about his knees." At Marcus's questioning look, she smiled. "Arthur is what I call my arthritis. Been with me longer than most friends. Might as well name him." A startled laugh escaped Marcus, rusty from disuse. The sound surprised him. They settled into an unexpectedly comfortable conversation over tea and fresh cookies. Eleanor asked questions about his service that somehow never felt intrusive, sharing stories of her husband that made the tight band around Marcus's chest loosen incrementally. For the first time in months, he found himself talking about the desert heat, the camaraderie, even some of the funnier moments with his unit. Stories he'd kept bottled inside because civilians never knew how to receive them. "What did you do before?" Eleanor asked, gesturing vaguely toward his leg. "Combat engineer," Marcus replied. "But before that, I was in college for architectural design. Never finished." "And now?" Marcus stared into his teacup. "Now I'm trying to get my foot in the door somewhere." "Anywhere, really?" He winced at his unintentional phrasing. "Sorry, bad choice of words." Eleanor's laugh was warm and genuine. "Gallows humor is a soldier's prerogative. Don't apologize for it." She studied him thoughtfully. "What would you do if doors weren't an issue? If you could choose anything?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through him. No one had asked him that since his injury. It had been all about what he could still do, what was realistic, what accommodations could be made. "I'd finish my degree," he said finally, the words emerging slowly, like something long buried being excavated. "Work for a firm that focuses on sustainable design. I had this idea once." He stopped, embarrassed by his own passion. "Go on," Eleanor encouraged, refilling his cup. "Adaptive architecture. Buildings designed from the ground up to be accessible, but not just ramps tacked on as afterthoughts." His hands moved as he spoke, shaping invisible structures in the air, beautiful spaces that work for everyone. "I used to think it mattered. Now," he shrugged, the movement stiff with suppressed emotion. "Now you know it matters," Eleanor said quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared truth. A clock chimed somewhere in the house, breaking the moment. Marcus glanced at his watch, surprised to find nearly 2 hours had passed. "I should go," he said, rising carefully. "Thank you for the tea and cookies. And the conversation." Eleanor walked him to the door, where she pressed a small container of cookies into his hands. "For later," she insisted. "And Marcus, would you consider coming back tomorrow? My porch railing has been wobbly for months, and I'd feel better having someone steady it before my granddaughter visits this weekend." He recognized the request for what it was, not charity, but connection. An offering. "I can do that," he said. "Around 10? Perfect." Her smile creased her whole face. "And bring an appetite. I make a mean meatloaf." That night, in his sparse apartment, Marcus slept more soundly than he had in weeks. The next morning, he arrived at Eleanor's precisely at 10, toolbox in hand, his first time retrieving it from the closet since moving in. The simple act of tightening bolts and reinforcing wood brought a forgotten satisfaction. His hands remembered their purpose, even when his mind had forgotten. Over meatloaf sandwiches afterward, Eleanor mentioned a book she couldn't reach on her top shelf. Then there was the matter of her garden, which needed turning for spring planting. Small tasks became reasons to return, each visit easier than the last. 2 weeks into their unlikely friendship, Marcus arrived to find Eleanor sitting at her kitchen table with a younger woman who shared her piercing blue eyes. "Marcus, this is my granddaughter, Sophia," Eleanor said. "Sophia, this is the young man I've been telling you about." Sophia's handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "Grandma says you saved her from being crushed by her grocery apocalypse." Eleanor snorted. "Dramatics run in the family, I'm afraid." "It was just a couple of bags," Marcus said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "6 bags, Eleanor corrected. "And that cantaloupe that tried to make a break for it." The easy banter continued through lunch, with Sophia revealing she was an executive at a local architectural firm, Hartwell Designs. Marcus nearly choked on his iced tea. "Hartwell? They're doing the new community center downtown," he said, unable to keep the admiration from his voice. "The concept renderings look incredible." Sophia tilted her head, studying him with new interest. "You follow architectural design?" Before he could downplay his knowledge, Eleanor interjected. "Marcus was studying architectural design before his service. Has quite the eye for it, from what he's told me." Under Sophia's curious gaze, Marcus found himself explaining his old passion project. Accessible design that prioritized both function and beauty. To his surprise, she asked insightful questions that led to a spirited discussion about the future of urban spaces. "We're actually looking for perspectives like yours," Sophia said thoughtfully. "The community center project has an accessibility focus, but frankly, none of our current team has lived experience with mobility challenges." Marcus's pulse quickened. "I'd be happy to offer input if that would help." "It would, but I'm thinking more than that." She glanced at her grandmother, who wore a suspiciously innocent expression. "We have an opening for a design consultant. It's part-time initially, but could grow. Would you be interested in interviewing?" The world seemed to tilt beneath Marcus. "Don't have my degree," he managed. Experience counts for a lot, Sophia replied, and you can finish your degree while working. We have a tuition assistance program. Later, after Sophia left with his contact information and a promise to set up a formal interview, Marcus turned to Eleanor with dawning suspicion. Did you plan this? Eleanor busied herself with the tea kettle. I simply mentioned to my granddaughter that I'd met someone with interesting ideas about architecture. The rest was all you. But you knew who she was, what she did, from the beginning. Eleanor faced him, her expression softening. Marcus, when you've lived as long as I have, you learn to recognize when the universe puts the right people in your path at the right time. She touched his arm gently. Sometimes carrying groceries is just carrying groceries. And sometimes it's the first step on a new path. The interview at Hartwell Designs the following week left Marcus breathless with possibility. The firm's modern offices hummed with creative energy, drawings and models showcasing projects that made his fingers itch to hold a pencil again. Sophia introduced him to the team with warm professionalism, making no mention of how they'd met, allowing his ideas and portfolio, hastily updated with old college projects and new sketches he'd worked on late into the nights, to speak for themselves. When the offer came 3 days later, Marcus sat on Eleanor's porch swing, the letter trembling in his hands. They want me, he said, disbelief coloring his voice. Part-time consultant to start, with tuition assistance to finish my degree. Eleanor poured him more lemonade, her expression pleased but unsurprised. Of course they do. You've got the talent and perspective they need. I don't know how to thank you. You already have. She settled beside him on the swing, their shoulders nearly touching. Do you know what the hardest part of growing old is, Marcus? It's not the aches or the wrinkles. It's feeling invisible, like the world has moved past any use it had for you. Marcus knew that feeling intimately, had lived with it since his discharge. The parallel between their experiences, the disabled veteran and the elderly woman, struck him with sudden clarity. You made me visible again, Eleanor continued softly. You saw me as a person worth helping, worth knowing. That gift is worth more than any job recommendation. In the months that followed, Marcus's world expanded in ways he'd stopped believing possible. The part-time position became full-time as his contributions to the community center project drew praise. Evening classes resumed his interrupted education. His apartment gained color, plants, art, books, as if his renewed spirit required external expression. And through it all, Sunday dinners at Eleanor's remained sacred. Sometimes Sophia joined them, sometimes Eleanor's friends from church or the neighborhood. Marcus found himself part of a makeshift family, created not from blood, but from chosen connections. On a crisp fall evening, nearly 6 months after that chance meeting outside the grocery store, Marcus arrived at Eleanor's with blueprints tucked under his arm and a lightness in his step that had nothing to do with his prosthetic. They approved it, he announced as Eleanor opened the door. The accessible playground design for the community center. They're implementing every element. Eleanor's face lit up. The sensory garden too? All of it. He spread the plans on her dining room table. They're calling it the Whitman Play Space. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. They're what? I might have suggested the name. Marcus smiled, watching emotion play across her features. It seemed fitting. None of this would exist without you. Oh, Marcus. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I only carried groceries that day because my delivery service had canceled. If I'd known what would come of it, you'd still have let me help. He finished for her, because that's who you are. As they stood together looking over the plans, a concrete manifestation of dreams reborn, Marcus realized the most profound change wasn't in his employment status or living situation. It was the healing that had taken place within him. The walls he'd built around his heart had crumbled, not all at once, but brick by brick, with each act of kindness given and received. Winter came, bringing holidays that Marcus celebrated at Eleanor's table, surrounded by her growing circle of adoptees, people drawn to her warmth like moths to flame. Spring returned, marking a year since their first meeting, and with it came the groundbreaking ceremony for the community center. Eleanor sat in the front row, pride radiating from her as Marcus stood with the design team. His cane, a concession to a particularly challenging winter with his prosthetic, planted firmly beside him. When it came time for him to speak about the accessible elements of the design, his eyes found hers in the crowd. True accessibility isn't just about ramps and elevators, he said, his voice steady with conviction. It's about creating spaces where everyone belongs, where no one feels like an afterthought. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and designing a world that sees them too. As applause rippled through the audience, Eleanor's eyes shone with tears and something else. Recognition of the man Marcus had become. The man he perhaps had always been beneath the layers of pain and isolation. Later, as they walked slowly from the ceremony site, Eleanor's hand resting lightly on his arm for balance, Marcus felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle drawn whole. "You know," Eleanor said thoughtfully, "my Harold always said the measure of a life well lived isn't in grand achievements, but in moments of connection. The times we reach across whatever divides us, age, ability, circumstance, and find ourselves reflected in another's eyes." Marcus nodded, understanding at a level beyond words. A year ago, he'd been a broken man carrying groceries, an act of kindness that had cost him nothing but meant everything. Now he stood tall, not despite his wounds but with them, transformed not by forgetting his pain, but by allowing it to connect him to others who understood suffering and resilience. "I think," he said finally, "that sometimes the key to our dreams isn't what we imagine it to be. Sometimes it's just being seen for who we really are." Eleanor squeezed his arm gently. "And sometimes it's seeing others the same way." As they continued their slow progress toward the car, Marcus reflected on how the simplest acts could alter lives in ways no one could predict. A disabled veteran had carried groceries for an elderly woman, unaware she held the key to his dream job. But the real transformation hadn't been about employment or financial security. It had been about connection, about two souls recognizing in each other a shared humanity that transcended their differences. The key, he realized, had never been the job at all. It had been Eleanor herself, and the courage to reach out, to connect, to begin again. The true dream had not been the position he now held, but the life he now lived. One of purpose, community, and deep, abiding connection. And that was a dream worth carrying, groceries and all.